All right, I'll go ahead and call us to order and declare that we have a quorum of 4 members present. That takes us to item C1, consideration and discussion related to 2019 STAR and end-of-course student performance and state accountability ratings. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Tonight we'll be basically combining two presentations. One, which is the preliminary information that we receive on our STAR and end-of-course assessment that we did in the spring of 2019. We do a report to the board on that, and then we're also folding in how that information is used to craft the state's accountability ratings that are assigned to both the school district and all of our 18 campuses that we had last year. So with more information on that, and to take us through a presentation on those results is Molly Perry, our Chief Administrative Officer. Mrs. Perry.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ely. Good evening. As Dr. Ely mentioned, we're going to be going through a little more information in one presentation than we typically do. So we'll start with those test score information. So as a reminder, under the STAR system, students can either not meet grade level, meaning they did not meet the passing standard, or if they do pass, there are actually 3 levels of passing standards. So approaches would be the first, and then students who achieve higher scaled scores would move into the meets, and then ultimately the master's grade level standard, which is the highest, where typically there are only a few questions per assessment that a student would miss. So all of the students who are in the meets level would be subsumed in approaches, because if you approach and you meet, then you would have both of those, and same thing with master. So as we move into looking at some of those percentages, you'll notice that they don't add up to 100% because those students are included in multiple groups as they move up higher in the passing standards. So let's just jump right in with reading. And this is going to look a little bit different than how we've presented the information in the past. And that's very intentional because this system is very heavily weighted on higher levels of performance along with growth. And so rather than breaking things down by numerous student groups, which we look at primarily in Domain 3, we're going to really look at it from that lens of what percentage of students in College Station ISD, which you'll see noted in the red columns, relative to the state average, were attaining the approaches, meets, and master's level. So we'll start with elementary reading. So you can see right away across the board, our students performed at higher rates of passing at the approaches level, and then of course meets and masters. At the intermediate level, we saw very similar trends with our 6th grade reading performance jumping up a little higher there at the meets level than we saw in some of those other grade levels. In 7th and 8th grade reading, you're going to notice very similar trends with our 8th graders particularly jumping out there with much higher rates of masters than what we saw across the state. Now in the area of math, we'll look at this in that same lens by elementary, intermediate, and middle. So we saw good performance rates at the 3rd and 4th grade level. 5th grade, you'll note, is when we start to see students testing out of grade levels and moving into an advanced math course track. And so we see that effect on our scores as we have groups of students that are testing out of their grade level starting in 5th. And so you see a narrower gap there. And then you especially see that affecting our 7th grade math scores because there's actually this last year, there were 437 7th graders who did not take the grade level assessment because they were taking either 8th grade or algebra or even being assessed on grade level assessments higher because they were in geometry or other advanced math courses. And so that was actually about half of our 7th graders that were excluded from that particular assessment. So that'll be the one significant difference you'll notice in the trends as we go through this evening. Then in the area of writing, we have 2 grade levels assessed, 4th and 7th. Statewide, writing is an area where students are not performing as well as other assessment areas, but our students did perform at higher rates than their peers across the state overall in both 4th and 7th grade writing.
what do you think that is? I have my probably reasons in the back of my mind, but as a state,
I think there's multiple factors involved here. When you're assessing a subject area only in 2 grade levels, oftentimes you see a greater emphasis during that year. But overall, the writing is a much different test. It's not a multiple choice test for the most part. You do have a section that's multiple choice in terms of revising and editing, grammar, and those types of skills, but a large component is actually where the students are given a very specific prompt to respond to, and then that's sent and graded by 2 different folks for calibration. So it's a very different test in its design, and in fact, in the next few years, we are going to see that integrated into a reading and writing assessment across the grade spans.
House Bill 3906 does mandate that by 2021, we'll have, instead of reading tests in grades 3 through 8, we'll have English language arts. So each one of those grade levels will have some sort of a writing component. It won't be, some of it will be short answer. It won't all be full compositions like we see in the 7th and 4th grade writing tests now. But I think that was a nod from the state level, understanding that kind of these standalone tests just a couple times during the grade span might not be the best approach. And so that's why we'll start seeing those changes here in a couple years.
So then in the area of science, similar to writing, that's only assessed in 2 grade levels prior to high school courses, and that is in the 5th and the 8th grade. We've done a lot of work in science over the last several years with the addition of science coordinator and really revising our curriculum, and we've seen pretty significant gains in that particular area. And you'll notice, especially in the 8th grade, that our students at the more advanced levels are really outperforming peers across the state. Then social studies prior to high school is only assessed in the 8th grade, and similar to writing overall, both at the district and state level, we see performance rates that are significantly lower than some other areas. I would attribute part of that to the fact that the standards in terms of the assessment are high, but it's also, while a multiple choice test, very heavily based on recalling facts and information and dates, and that's not similar to some of the other tests that students take. So then moving into our end of course exams, we're looking here at first time testers because that's the bulk of the students, although the accountability system does look at students who are retesting. And our Algebra 1, I have a note there that we actually had 402 students in middle school, so either 7th or 8th grade, that were included in these numbers. We do have a higher rate of middle schoolers involved in algebra testing. While it's not uncommon across the state, we definitely have more students that participate in those advanced math courses. And so our rates look quite good, not only at the approaches, but the meets and masters level. In the area of biology, you can see we've got some similar trends in terms of our overall student performance. And then English 1 and 2, similar to the writing assessments we saw earlier, these are very, very heavily weighted on the written component. Statewide, students do not perform as well, and the standards are definitely higher than some of the other EOCs, especially biology, and you'll see U.S. history here in a moment. But overall, we have seen some good gains in the area of both English 1 and 2, especially in English 2, our students are overall doing well. Then U.S. history, you can see right away statewide passing rate is very high. So it's interesting, especially when you look back towards that 8th grade, very, very different passing standards. And so even though the content's actually similar in a lot of ways, we see a big difference in the results based on how those scores are scaled. All right. So let's shift gears a little bit into how all this information funnels into a state accountability system. If you'll recall, this last year we spent a lot of time talking about the design of that new system and how those letter grades A through F were derived. So we'll, as we go through, do a just very brief review because I know you all are relatively familiar with those components. As you'll recall, last year in 2018, that was our first year to have district level scores in the 3-domain system, one letter grade per domain, as well as an overall rating, while our campuses still received a MET standard versus improvement required rating. This year, we are full on implementation, and so not only will districts receive those letters, but campuses did as well. So as a reminder, according to the Texas Education Agency, this is a system where a C is considered to be acceptable performance. B is calibrated to recognized, A is to exemplary, and then of course D's and F's are considered in need of improvement and unacceptable. And so as we move through, keep that in mind as well, please. So I mentioned there's a 3-domain system. We've got the student achievement component, school progress, and closing the gaps. The overall calculation, though, is based on the best of student achievement or school progress, and at a weight of 70%, and closing the gaps at 30. So let's walk through each of those 3 domains. So domain 1, student achievement, as you would expect, is heavily influenced by how students perform on the STAR. In fact, at the elementary and middle school level, it is completely based on how students do on STAR. They average the approaches, meets, and masters rates, and then convert that average score to a scaled score to determine that domain 1 overall performance rating. However, for high schools, as well as the district as a whole, it's not only an average of those passing rates for STAR, but also the rate of graduates who are considered college, career, and military ready, and then our graduation rate. Now, in Domain 1, graduation rate is the best of your 4, 5, or even 6-year rate, and it does include exclusions based on certain types of criteria that students might be not included. For example, if a student continued on because they required additional services under their IEP and special education, we would exclude them instead of saying they didn't graduate on time. That's important because when we get to Domain 3, that's very different when we talk about graduation rates. So as a district, our STAR performance, or that average of the 3 performance levels at all tests, all grade levels, scaled to a score of 89. And then our rate of college, career, and military readiness for our graduating class scaled to a 93, and graduation rate to a 90. So if you'll notice, when you weight those out, it actually doesn't come out to an 89. I think it's a 90 or a 91. But because we have at least one campus with a D in that domain, the state automatically adjusts that score down to be an 89 or a B. So then in Domain 2, there are 2 possible components. You've got your academic growth and your relative performance. So I do want to take just a moment on academic growth because this one tends to be the most confusing of the 3. So first of all, we are talking just about student performance on reading assessments and math assessments. And we're looking at how they did in the previous year. So on the left, you'll see where it says previous year, on those performance levels, on those reading and math assessments, relative to how they did in the current year. So in this case, we're looking at 2018 performance versus 2019. So this really only begins in 4th grade because our 3rd graders don't have a prior year STAR performance. And we are looking at not only how they did in terms of the mastery level, did they approach, meet, master, or not meet, but also did they hit that growth measure? And that is an individually determined component based on that student's scaled score year over year. So let's actually start in the bottom right corner. So say you've got a 5th grade student who took a reading assessment in 2018 and they mastered on their performance level. Well, the next year in 6th grade, in order for that student to receive a point for your campus or your district, that student would have to stay in the master's level. Say they missed a couple of questions more the next year, but they still were at the meets, which is definitely a high level of performance, you would actually get no credit for that student's performance on growth. So same thing, if you were in meets and you moved down to approaches, even though you're still passing, no points. Sometimes students can stay in the same level. So say you stay in meets year over year or you stay in approaches year over year. depending on how that individual student's performance fell with their scaled score, you might get a whole point or you might get a half a point. So all of those points are added up and divided by the total possible number of points and then scaled over to a score to tell you how you did in your Domain 2 academic growth. And you'll note I've got a 200-page manual that can describe that in more detail.
Should
So,
anybody need more detail.
should you be interested. Part 2, school progress, is relative performance. So the title school progress really is probably not the most descriptive of this one because it really is how you do relative to the percent of students who are enrolled at your campus or in your district who are economically disadvantaged. So this is a chart provided by the Texas Education Agency with an example, not College Station ISD, but just an example of a district where 71% of the students were economically disadvantaged, and their combined performance on STAR and college and career military readiness fell out at a 50. So based upon that performance, we would come over to the percent economically disadvantaged, up to the score, and you can see they would have earned a B. Had that same score been earned, but they only had, say, 20% economically disadvantaged, they would be probably an F. So this is all relative to the percent of students who are economically disadvantaged, and it ties back into that Domain 1 performance, including both STAR and CCMR, or for elementary campuses, STAR.
So they don't look at the actual student if that actual student is economically disadvantaged. They look
This is cumulative.
Aggregated to the school level.
okay, so it doesn't matter what kiddo. Okay.
Right. This is total performance, all tests, all students at either the campus or the district level. All right. So looking at the district's performance on that first way with the really comprehensive chart, we scored 84. And then on the second way, where we look at the percent of students who are economically disadvantaged, our performance relative to that percentage was a 90. So again, 90 is not a B, but because we do have at least one campus with a D in this domain, they adjusted that score to an 89.
And I think you said this on Domain 2, it's either or on that one. So
Right.
relative performance is the one that counted for CSISD. Different campuses, different ones. Some of them were academic growth, some of them were relative performance.
So do you get the lick the same way as if it was say we had a 80 average, we'd automatically go down to 79, a C?
No, it's really
It's
just
just
about
for the-
not giving you an A.
Okay. I didn't know if you got dinged all the way down or not.
No. So Domain 3, closing the gaps. This is the domain that really helps the state to ensure that we are in compliance with the federal law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, because it breaks that performance down by student group. And under this system, we have more student groups than ever before. In fact, there are 14 of them, including the various race and ethnicity groups, as well as not only the students who are currently served through special education, but the students who were formerly served in special education, meaning they have been dismissed because they no longer meet eligibility. Then looking at those students who are continuously enrolled in our district versus those who are mobile, our English learners, and then economically disadvantaged. So as you can imagine, you'll have a number of students who fall into multiple groups, and so they would count as many times as appropriate depending on their particular demographics and circumstances. So each of those student groups is compared to an achievement target, and that target varies depending on the student group. And so far, in 2 years in the system, those targets have been static, but those are set by the state. And then depending on whether you're in elementary or a middle school or a high school versus district, there are various weights that are applied to calculate your overall domain score based on the percent of those targets that you met. So this is a chart that shows specifically what those targets look like. So you can see across the top, we've got all of the different student groups. And then the first component is academic achievement. So in this domain, academic achievement means that we're looking at the percent of students who hit that meets grade level or higher standard. So just passing, again, is really not the name of the game in terms of this particular system. This would be looking at meets or above above. Then the next component with the targets you'll see here are academic growth. So this looks a lot like what we just saw with the complex chart of year-over-year performance and whether students are considered to have grown on this assessment. Then
And that's only for elementary and middle, because high schools have that one below it.
Exactly. Then we are looking at our graduation status. And again, this is federal. So unlike Domain 1, where there's more leniency in looking at 4, 5, or 6 years, this is only 4-year rates, and it does not include any exclusions. And so even though 90% appears to be pretty low relative to the graduation rates that we're accustomed to seeing, it is much more stringent in terms of the students who are involved in that cohort and whether they're considered to have graduated in 4 years. Then student achievement, we are looking again at elementary and middle. This is the average of approaches, meets, and METs, similar to Domain 1. And then finally, our college, career, and military readiness for high schools and districts. And so the rates and the weights vary. English proficiency, I'm sorry, that's the last one there. That would be the sole component based upon TELPUS data. And that is 10% for both districts and in all of our campuses. And so for the district, what that looks like is, number one, grade level performance. So again, this is the percent of students who were at that meets or higher standard. If you'll recall, when we went through the scores in the first half of the presentation, generally those looked pretty good in terms of overall rates of students at meets or higher. That weights in at 50% of Domain 3 for a district or a high school. Graduation rate, that 38, that's a little confusing. That's not our graduation rate. That's the percent of targets met on that federal graduation status. And so while that's a lower percentage of targets, as I mentioned, it does not take into account those individual circumstances where we're, say, complying with federal law to provide extended services for students and not graduating students in 4 years. Then English language proficiency, or TELPAS, you either meet that one or you don't because there's only one target, and we did. And then finally, the college, career, and military readiness, we hit all of those targets. So the score scales to 100, being a weight of 30, which I believe the math comes out to just right at a 90. So again, we earned ultimately a B in that area. So overall, what does that look like? We are a solid B
We're an 89.
across the board due to the way that the system is designed and the scores are assigned.
That's as a district.
As a district.
And here are the campuses.
Yes. So looking at overall campus performance, this information was released last Thursday, and so it is all very readily accessible, not only on our website, but a state site, which I will direct you all to here in a moment. So overall, our campuses, we had 4 who were assigned an A. We do have several campuses who overall were a D, and we're working closely already with each of those to really identify where those areas of concern are and develop plans for improvement in performance. While STAR is one point of data, we do absolutely want to make sure that we're providing the very best opportunities for instruction at all of our campuses, and so we'll be looking more closely there as well.
We'll be developing target improvement plans, and you can expect to see those presented to you for your approval. We're targeting right now the October board meeting for that information. So we've got some training coming up in a couple weeks from now for district and campus leaders at those campuses, and we'll be working to do root cause analysis and bringing all that information to you and working our plan.
Also worth mentioning, there are distinctions assigned for campuses who demonstrate high rates of performance relative to their peer group. And the way that works for the content areas listed there on the left is that each campus is assigned a group based on like campuses, not within the district necessarily, but across the state. And so they're looking at things like the total enrollment, the grade levels, the percent of students who are economically disadvantaged. And so, we wouldn't see necessarily that even both of our high schools are in that same peer group when they're calculating distinctions, because they're looking at performance relative to that group in the top quartile. Then we've also got some other components with academic growth and post-secondary readiness, where we did have several campuses earn. And you might be wondering, how do elementaries earn post-secondary readiness?
That's an excellent question.
It's 100% based on STAR performance. Yes. And not at all. You are with us, Mr. Schaefer. And with that, I do want to mention just the txschools.gov is the website that TEA has put together that provides comprehensive information not only on districts but also campuses, so you can really drill down and look at those things in more detail and have a better understanding of how the system is working and how those scores are assigned. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Thank you. I'll start. I do have a couple of questions. One, I'm just asking for the sake of asking. I know our answer as a district, I hope. I see systems like this. I think this is, I've been on the board 9 years. I think this is my third system, so don't get too used to it. It'll change in 2 years probably. I guess the question is, I see a lot of perverse incentives in that presentation that the system creates. Let me give you an example. If I'm looking at a school that may not be performing that well on growth, I would be incentivized not to teach them too well too young. I would teach them, let's meet the standard early on, and then we can get better from there, and voila, we've got growth. I want to make sure that our district's not doing things like that to, quote, teach the test or teach to the system or whatever you want to call it. I know we're not, but I just want to ask and make sure.
I think your 9.5 years of service on the board would reflect the fact that, no, we have not bent our knee to this system or any other state mandated system. That we know that that tests given in the springtime are important, but they're only one measure of how well we do. And so, no, we don't go and sell out and strategize and try to do all these different things, as you kind of pointed out there, that we could be incentivized to do based on this system. Because you made a good point in your first comments, which was this will change. We are committed every day to doing what is in the best interest of students and those students who are right there in front of us. And so we teach them the very best of our ability every single day.
Okay, good. That's what I was hoping. I thought I knew the answer, but I wanted to ask it. I guess that's why we didn't go get a bunch of Met Standard banners made and put up all over our school. Okay, good. And the other one is, it seemed like some of the schools where it looked like they might have not done as well on a particular area, we had other schools at the same level do exceedingly well. And I wonder if we make efforts to look at, okay, why? If we can explain it, is there something this school's doing that maybe this school could borrow or something like that?
So we will be working through an improvement process, as Mrs. Perry talked about, with some of those schools that you saw up there with D and some other schools as well who are going through this process. So we will be doing a very deep dive into what goes into making an effective schools and the framework that goes into that. So we'll be looking at not only what we're doing with instruction, but school climate, and we'll be looking at the resources that we have available for schools. So we're going to be looking at this not only from a district perspective and a campus perspective and classroom perspective to figure out what we can do to improve. And again, it's to improve and be better at delivering instruction to students and student learning, not to be better just because of a assessment system that we went over this evening.
Got it. Thank you. Other questions?
I think I'll leave my opinion of this assessment system to myself.
I probably should have myself. Okay, well, thank you very much. That takes us to C2, consideration, discussion, possible action related to 2019-20 budget. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. We have for you this evening the first of what will be 3 brief presentations on the 2019-2020 school budget. Just a reminder, we've been working very hard, both administratively and the board level, to prepare what we hope you will approve at the 7 p.m. regular meeting. We have this one is got the most information, and would love to have any discussion that you feel is necessary at this point regarding the budget. But this is what we have advertised to the community and what we will be bringing to you at 7 o'clock for your approval. So with that, I'd like to introduce Deputy Superintendent and Chief Financial Officer Mike Martindale to share the proposed final budget for 2019-2020. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. Mr. Schaefer, I apologize in advance. My presentation is not as colorful as Ms. Perry's.
As long as there's not red.
Okay, too much. Thank you. Have clarification on that. We began this conversation back in March. So as we move into this school year, the 1920 school year, our projection on enrollment and average daily attendance is a driver, really the ADA as far as budget preparation. We're projecting a 2.9% growth over last year's PEIMS number. The 13,544, that's enrollment in October of last year. And our projection is 13,939 in October of this year from our demographer. I can tell you as of this morning, we were at 13,880. So we're about 2.5, 2.6% relative to the PEIMS number of last year at this point in time. And we're tracking, Dr. Ely, 320 to 370 over day to day for the first 3 days. Again, we apply that 2.9% growth on ADA, and that's really what drives our calculation of the budget. You can kind of see the historicals of the prior years. Last year, we finished the year at a loss of 0.2. I think we had originally projected about a 1% loss, so we trended much better by the close of the year as opposed to what we thought we might. And again, applying the 2.3% growth in ADA in preparing our proposed budget. We have projected revenue of $118.4 million. A vast majority of our revenue comes from local property taxes, and we're projecting just shy of $103 million on property taxes this year. That is reflective of an M&O tax rate of 97 cents. There are other local revenue pieces as well that you can see here: interest income, other is for facility rental, summer school, those types of things. Co-curricular, $430,000, gate receipts. SHARS reimbursement, we're projecting to be around $2.3 million for 1920. State revenue around 5.3, and TRS on behalf contribution of 5.5. But the whole point of this graphic is, as you're all aware, that a majority of our revenue comes from local property tax. On the appropriation side, we're projecting $121.8 million worth of expenses. 85% of that is payroll, $103.7 million. There is a particular slice missing on this chart that unfortunately you've probably become accustomed to seeing the last year or two, and that is recapture. So I'll speak to that here momentarily. Other costs, the contracted services of 8.8, material supplies and operating. Those are utilities, campus department budgets, travel, fuel, transportation, all of those things that encompass the day-to-day operations of the district, and capital outlay, a majority of that. There's some fixed cost in there, but the remainder of that, it goes to Mr. Hall's departments for taking care of our facilities. I will tell you, last year our payroll number, when we were dealing with the $14 million recapture, was more of a 70, it was 78% of our budget or somewhere along those lines. Because recapture had eaten up so much of our budget. start and work our way from the top. Again, using a projected growth of 2.9 to 3% on ADA. That's the number we've been using really since March, April, when we began our projections. A local property tax and M&O rate of 97 cents. Again, that came with House Bill 3 as we started looking at those projections in June. Prior to that was $1.04, so we'll be recognizing compression on the M&O of 7 cents to be considered later with our proposed budget tax rate. Total estimated revenues, as I mentioned previously, $118.4 million. To mention something on the local property tax, $102,947. Last month I had that at $103,100,000. We're taking into account some lost property tax off of the selling of the College Station Med. So we'll collect taxes on that property through the end of July of this past tax year. So we lost a couple of $100,000 on the sale of that property to a nonprofit. On the appropriation side, our payroll cost, the $95.6 million, that captures the additional 3.8 in compensation for our employees and our compensation package when approved in June. Also, an additional $200,000 because we have adjusted our pay rate for substitutes going into this year to try to fulfill that need. That was something we heard throughout the course of last year, so we're trying to be a little more aggressive with that rate. So I had added some more payroll to that since last month to cover that increase rate. Riverbend, $850,000. Of course, new personnel you're familiar with, just shy of $1.8 million for positions throughout the district. This may be my favorite number, but I think I want to mention that last month is tracking about $400,000 with a loss in local property tax revenue. And because we're using current values as opposed to prior, we talked about that a while back as well, it's almost a dollar for dollar move. So when we lost that revenue, that pulled that recapture amount down that much. Also made some adjustments in some of our weighted funded programs, which drew that down to a balance of zero. Now, this thing will move on us through the course of the year, so let me say that. If for some reason our 2.9, if we recognize better than that, it'll stay at the zero. We'll recognize a little more state revenue. If it goes below that, then we are right there. I can tell you we're very close. So if at the end of the year our ADA is 2.6, then we'll recognize a little bit of recapture. That's how close we are right now. So,
And just so people get excited about that, this year we are sending how much back on that?
Just under $14 million.
14, yeah, the year we just finished, we projected 14.6, and I think once we have our audited budget, it'll be about 14.1, 14.2. And if you remember early on in April, May, we were staring at $18 million
On this budget for next year.
on 1920 budget. And if you remember, I always said if they would just let us keep our own money, it would create opportunity for us to do things. And in this case, compensation, open another school, more personnel, it's absolutely benefited us. Appropriations of 121.8 I mentioned before, and so we're looking at a draw on our fund balance of $3.3 million projected for 1920. Historical on our adopted and what we've audited and what our fund balances look like over the years. I'll just, for example, start in 16-17, we adopted a deficit of $473,000. We ended up putting almost $3 million in our fund balance to $35.9 at audit. For 17-18, we adopted a negative 2.4, put in just shy of $1 million in our fund balance, and audited at $36.9 million. And that first year, we had a recapture payment of about $4.8 million. It's our current year. We still got to wrap up this month. We adopted a negative 4.6. We will have a recapture of 14.1 to 14.2 there in that ballpark. What I'm using when I look at the out year just on this projection and the pool of fund balance is I'm using 2 million. I think that's a conservative number, but it won't be more than that. How about I say it like that? I think that's worst case scenario.
I think you did that on tape.
I did that on tape. It won't be worse than that. I did do that on tape. The draw
at
of
audit in
yeah,
December.
you'll see it in December. You know what? That's why I hesitated for a minute. Drawing 3.3 off of our fund balance in the 1920. I have a projection of 31.5 million remaining in our fund balance. That is almost 26% of our projected appropriated budget for 1920, or that's equal to 95 operating days. So 3 months. Our proposed tax rate to go with this budget, again, years past, M&O is $1.04, so we'll be proposing to drop that 7 cents. INS last year was 33.2 cents. We can cover our debt service payments with 26.9 for 1920 for a total tax rate of $1.23.9. It's a drop of 13.3 cents, or almost 10% over 1819. I can leave this one here for a little while. Don't want to. Historical of our tax rates, just a visual again, 137.2 last year. Would be proposing 123.9 for this year, and we've an example of a 13.3 cent drop on the tax rate, or the 10% decrease. I just use a home appraised at 300,000. That would be a change in taxes of $365 less. This is looking one more year out, just to give us a feel of how things are tracking. Enrollment or an ADA growth of 3%. Actually, I think Templeton's using about a 3.15 right now. Use 3%, capping our property tax revenue growth at 2.5%, projecting our M&O rate, and that will move depending on how much values actually go up, and it'll compress it depending on the growth of those appraised values. We have a jump in recapture again. That's an early number. Part of what's helping us this year also is opening River Bend, because we get credit against our recapture because it's a new instructional facility. And so we won't have that, and that probably accounts for about $500,000 or $600,000 of that recapture. So next year, early projections similar to what we're looking at this year. I did use a 3% growth on payroll for compensation. We've talked about this several times. Mm-hmm.
I was just looking at the new personnel compared.
Oh, yeah, 800, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we just start with a number and as a placeholder amount. And Mike talked about the Templeton demographic numbers of 3%. Just a reminder, they'll be giving us new numbers based on our enrollment this year, and they'll do new projections for us in the early fall. And just, I know that in years past, the board has become accustomed to seeing a line graph showing the next 5 years in the future. We still, from the people who are modeling this for us from the state level, we still don't have the out years, any information on that. So putting that information out would be counterproductive, because we just don't know how some of these things are going to play out in the future. So as soon as we can get that information, we'll start looking at that administratively and sharing it with the board as it becomes appropriate.
Thank you for that. Let me see if I understand it, one piece of information correctly. What you've projected for payroll costs is a 3% increase, which is roughly $3 million.
Correct.
And we're running the projected deficit of roughly 3 million, little extra.
Yes, sir.
So if worse came to worse and we had to balance the budget for some reason, I don't anticipate we do because I know how that's worked and you did a good job showing that in the graph. But we could if we had to. So that makes me feel good about not seeing that graph because it means we could keep the line from going down if we needed to.
There's a number of variables in there that could be
Right.
adjusted to meet whatever needs that we
Right.
would have both for the current year and then out into the future.
Absolutely. And I just picked one to kind of make the point. But yeah, absolutely. Got it.
It's still concerning to me that not just us, but other school districts around the state, I mean, we're getting accustomed to looking at a deficit every year. And that just galls me every time I see it. I mean, it's, what about schools that don't have large fund balances? I know this addressed some of it this year, but I don't think, by no means have they solved it.
This will be the first year in the last several that we've actually will run a deficit, even though we have adopted a deficit in August. We've been able to almost break even or put some money back into our fund balance. So we've been building our fund balance over the last 5 or 6 years to be in this position. But your point is well made, Mr. Schaefer, that it's still different school districts have different realities when it comes to school funding. And even with this new system, which is a huge investment on the part of the legislature. I don't want that to go unnoticed. It's a huge investment on the part of the legislature. There are still winners and losers, and there are still those communities that benefit more than others. So we just have to understand that any system that's predicated on property taxes, where there's vast discrepancies in property tax across a state as big and as varied as Texas, is inherently difficult to do. So as we continue to have this type of system, we will continue to work to make it from a state level not only adequate to meet the needs of Texas school children, but equitable to meet the needs of kids from various different backgrounds across the state.
I think that's well said. And I think it's also worth pointing out that we struggle with the balance between spending for today and using the funds available, and then kind of, it's twofold. We don't want to mortgage the future, but we also don't want to shortchange today by building up more of a unbalance than we need to. And I think that chart you had, and if you want to go back to it, where you illustrate what Dr. Ely just said, makes the point fairly well in that our adopted budget, based on our spending practices, even though we have a deficit, if you look at it, it's been, how many years is that? 6 years? Since we actually ran a deficit. So, and some of those are large surpluses. Well, one way
It's
to.
5 million. It's a net difference of 2.5 million, depending on what happens this year. So if you
Right.
look at that, expecting a $2 million final audited fund balance. I mean, since 2013, we've almost broke even, which is, again, the only thing I'm saying is
Yeah, no, I hear
school
what you're
districts
saying.
can't continue to
Run deficits.
run
And in
deficits.
particular, a lot of them they project a deficit and actually run it. And I think that is a problem, and clearly it can't continue.
I think the 2014 Martindale has done a great job making sure that happens, and he can continue to work his magic.
That's it. Well, and when you look at it, and, I had to do some of that math I was talking about. It got complicated, talking about number of schools we've opened in the last 9 years. But when you look at that, and a lot of those schools are opened in that time frame, and we were able to do that and maintain the high level of student performance and still grow a fund balance from 30.3 million up to, well, depending on which of the last two you look at, somewhere around 35, 36 million.
850,000 for this year for Riverbend, 2.4 million last year for Wellborn Middle School, 1.4 million the year before that for Pecan Trail, and just in new staff for the opening of those campuses.
Right.
Yes, sir.
I also think it's good for the audience to know that are watching and listening to this, how much of, during our bonds, things that we used to pay for of our local budget that we're using on bonds. I mean, that's,
Right, and that is one of the things that we are making a commitment to, is getting that back into our annual budget to be able to do the deferred maintenance and the projects that we have available, because the 2015 bond is almost done with the deferred maintenance projects that we have available there.
I know you're going to show it to us again, but will you go to that one that had that bottom, that one? So 9.69% reduction in the tax rate?
Yes, sir.
See, that would have been a good place to use some color and highlight that.
Highlight that one.
Again, that 7 cents was brought on by the passage of House Bill 3, but the 6.3% is because of not only increasing property taxes, but the ability of the school district to pay off some of our debt and to lower our overall debt service payment. So we're happy to be able to pass along that to our taxpayers.
Absolutely. All right. Okay.
I'll say it again before the night's over.
Yeah, at least twice more, I hope. Anything else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That takes us to item C3, consideration, discussion, possible action related to naming the TASB delegate and alternate for the 2019 Delegate Assembly. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Members of the board, as you are aware, the Texas Association of School Boards has a delegate assembly at the Conference on Education that will be occurring in September 20th, 21st, and 22nd of this year, so next month. On Saturday, the 21st, we have the opportunity to be represented by having a delegate to the TASB Assembly. The time period for that is from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon at the K. Bailey Hutchison Dallas County Convention Center. What we need to do this evening is to select not only a delegate but an alternate to serve should that delegate not be able to serve. So that is the business we have before us at agenda item number 3. So with that, I will stop and let the wrangling begin.
there's 2 positions needed and there's 3 people absent. This should be easy.
Right, so sometimes we have used this as an opportunity to let new board members gain exposure to the delegate process at TASB. And I believe we've already discussed it with her, but Mrs. Green may be our delegate. And then if we move in terms of seniority, I believe Mrs. Nolan, you would have the opportunity to be the alternate. Thoughts?
I'm fine with that. I mean, I can make it work.
Okay.
Have you have talked to Amanda? Yes. Okay, and she's good?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And if not, she'll
As
have
far
an
as you know.
alternate.
Well, that's why we have an alternate, right?
You got it.
Okay.
Do you need us to do something formal?
I don't know that we need a formal action on that, but what I understand is that Mrs. Green would be the delegate for College Station ISD. Should she be unable to serve, that Mrs. Nolan would serve in her place as the alternate.
I would agree with that.
Because I think Mr. Williams was going to make that if it needed to be.
Right.
Just a reminder, while we're talking about the TASA TASB conference, it starts Friday morning at 7:30. We have a board training that we will be doing with 4 other school districts that morning that are in our TPAC, or Texas Public Accountability Consortium district group. That's Georgetown ISD, Royce City ISD, Sunnyvale ISD, and Burke-Burnett ISD. That will take place from 8:45 to 9:45 that Friday morning. Just need to know how many people, and Carrie will need to, sometime over the course of the evening, she's going to need to talk with you all about hotel accommodations, and night y'all will be there and everything. So make sure you see Carrie sometime between our several meetings that we had this evening. Okay?
Okay. We're done with that.
That is it
Okay.
for item 3.
C4, consideration discussion related to the district's hazardous traffic conditions resolution. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Members of the board, I ask our Director of Transportation, Hector Silva, to join me here at the table. He will be passing out some maps. We'll also display those maps up here in just a few minutes to talk about an action item that we have on tonight's agenda. Every year, we ask you to designate some routes that fall within the 2 mile zone. Just, I guess, let me back up a little bit. We transport every student who resides more than 2 miles from the school that he or she is zoned to. In certain instances, we can transport and receive some compensatory funding if there are some hazardous routes that exist. And it's less than 2 miles from the student's home to the school. And this is how we determine that through board action with a resolution to name these as hazardous routes. So with more information and to kind of walk you through the different ones is Mr. Silva. Mr. Silva.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. As you know, when our district grows, it changes, new developments come in, streets are connected, other streets are built, and that's why we come before you. So every time there's a change with our hazardous zones, that we must present it to you and then send it over to TEA if they ask for it. So without any further ado, I'm going to try to be as concise as possible. There's a lot of maps here. If you stop me, if you need me to stop on anything, please do that. So the first map that you'll see, and as Dr. Ely mentioned, when they have to walk along or cross a major thoroughfare in our district, then that may qualify them as a hazardous zone. The first one is College Hills, and the roads that we are considering hazardous are Highway 6, Harvey, and University, and you can see that at the top right. We do have 3 buses that serve this campus, and you can see them on the map, 176, 182, and 177. If there's no questions, we're going to move on to Forest Ridge and the roads there.
Mr. Sil, are these changes or are these just what we already have?
If there was no changes to the boundaries, then it's the same as last time.
Okay.
With the addition of schools and, like I said, with construction, then some of those may be changes. Like for College Hills, it would be the same as the last
Same as it
time.
was. Okay.
Forest Ridge, actually the same as last time also. So, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, just, so if I'm looking at this, what I'm looking at is, are the roads hazardous? So Welborn Road, George Bush, Texas Avenue, things like that, where I wouldn't want a student trying to.
To walk across or
Correct.
walk along. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So for Forest Ridge, we've got the roads that we're considering is William D. Fitch, Greens Prairie Road, and Arrington. We do have one bus that serves this area here in the red, and that's bus 204. Got the campus over here on this side. If there are no questions on Forest Ridge, we will move on to Greens Prairie. So Greens Prairie Elementary, we've got the hazardous roads considering are Welborn Road, Greens Prairie Road, and Reuter Road. We've got 2 buses that serve those areas that are hazardous, that are within the 2 miles. You got the campus right here in orange. And we got 147 and 140 serving those areas.
Has the name change gone into effect?
Sorry?
Has the road name change in that area gone into effect yet? from the city?
Which one, Dr. Lee?
Greens Prairie Trail is changing to Greens Prairie Road and, okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's in effect yet. Caleb, do you know? No, it has not yet.
Because one's going to Victoria, right?
The next campus is Pebble Creek Elementary. The road that we're considering here is William D. Fitch. And we got 1 bus to one area. Bus 172 is serving this area across William D. Fitch. Next campus is River Bend Elementary, new campus. So this is new. You've never seen this before. So the hazardous roads that we are considering are Holloman Drive and Rock Prairie Road. Now, I will note that you will see Holloman Drive here. Certain sections of Holloman Drive are considered hazardous and others are not due to construction and improvements on walkways, controlled intersections. That's why this over here on the north is not considered hazardous, and this on the south is considered hazardous. We got one bus serving that campus for hazardous conditions. Next campus is South Knoll Elementary. Lots of activity there. We got 3 roads that we are considering. That's Welborn Road, George Bush Drive, and Texas. And there is one little lot of land over here on this side that's served by 175, bus 175, and it's that corner that we periodically have students on that road. And that's the only part that actually qualifies. Next campus is Southwood Valley Elementary. We got Harvey Mitchell Road that we consider hazardous, Texas Avenue, and Highway 6. We got 2 buses that serve that campus for the hazardous areas, 137 and 133. We can always come back to something if you guys think of a question. So Spring Creek Elementary, we've got Barron Cutoff Road, Welborn Road, and also William D. Fitch. We got 3 buses that serves that area. Here's the campus. We got bus 206, 178, and 146. Moving on to the intermediate, we've got Cypress Grove next, and the roads that we are considering here are Barron Road, Welborn Road, and William D. Fitch, Highway 40. We got 3 buses serving those areas here. 129, 168, and 132. The next campus is Oakwood Intermediate, and literally we do have a lot of activity based on where that campus is located. You can see that George Bush is considered hazardous by our standards, and Texas Avenue. We've got a total of 4 buses serving those areas.
Makes sense.
The next campus is Pecan Trail Intermediate. We've got Welborn Road again, Greens Prairie Road, and Reuter Road. And as you can see, lots of activity there also, but because of where it's situated. We've got 6 buses that's serving all the hazardous areas that are within 2 miles of that campus.
Will these be the same 6 buses as Welborn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, a lot of the middle schools are going to mimic the intermediates. The next one is A&M Consolidated Middle School, and we got 4 buses, and we've got George Bush, just like Oakwood, and Texas, and it's the identical same buses serving those campuses. College Station Middle School, very alike Cypress Grove. We've got Barron Road and Welborn Road, and we got the same area that we are serving as well with 3 buses. And as Dr. Ely said, Welborn Middle School, we've got the same areas, same buses serving that campus for those hazardous areas. We got a total of 6 buses there also.
3 more. 3 more.
The next one is A&M Consolidated High School. We've got Harvey Mitchell and Welborn Road that we're considering. We've got 2 buses that are serving those areas, bus 130 and 198. College Station High School, we've got 6 buses that are serving that campus because of Welborn Road and also William D. Fitch. You can't see the campus because we blocked it here. It's about right there where the campus sits. And the last one for you to consider is College View High School. Now that campus serves the entire district, but there are some areas that are within the school, within 2 miles, that we consider hazardous. And we have George Bush that we are considering, Texas, Harvey Mitchell, and Welborn Road also. We got a total of 6 buses that serve that area. You may have noticed that that's 17 campuses, and we've got a total of 19. Well, 2 of those campuses, Creekview and Rock Prairie, are not served with buses because all their land is very close to that campus.
And then it looks like College View mirrors at least a lot of the same bus routes, Oakwood
Yes, sir.
and AMCMS. Okay, yeah. Good.
Again, this is for your consideration to pass this resolution at our regular board meeting that starts at 7 p.m. Love to answer any questions you have.
Oh, it looks good to me. In fact, I probably would have had more hazardous routes than you all, but I understand you have requirements and things you look at, sidewalk improvements and things like that.
Just on the side, Mr. Harris, we are allotted 10% of our 2-mile total miles. Our total 2 miles is about 558,000 miles that we run.
Wow.
And we actually, last year, we reported 38,000 hazardous miles. So we've got some leeway if we wanted to grow and there was more hazardous zones, then we could add them and still get funded for it.
All right. Any other
Thank you.
questions? Thank you. Okay, that takes us to C5, consideration, discussion, possible action related to CSISD's board operating procedures regarding changes mandated by House Bill 2840. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. House Bill 2840 was passed during the 86 Texas legislature, and it made some changes to the public comment portion of local government meetings. That statute does take effect on September the 1st. We will have updated board policy to reflect the changes in that new statute, but we won't have that until October or maybe November of the fall. So we thought it was important for us just to talk about a couple things that have changed and make sure that we adjust, at least for the interim, or consider adjusting our board operating procedures to reflect the new requirements from 2840. If you would, at your place, you have an updated portion of the board operating procedures. I would invite the board members to turn to page 7. And we're going to address constituent conduct during board meetings. You will go down to, and the proposed changes are highlighted in yellow. One of those changes is that we can still limit the amount of time that a member of the public has to speak, and we have traditionally done that for 3 minutes. What House Bill 2840 does mandate, though, if you have someone who needs an interpreter, and we're interpreting this as it needs a language interpreter or a sign language interpreter, that we would need to double those minutes. So we are adding a bullet that says, well, the third bullet is each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. We are proposing adding another bullet that says those citizens who require the use of an interpreter will be allowed 6 minutes. Okay, to reflect what we have in the new language. The next thing that must change after September 1st is that any member of the public wishing to address the board on an item on that evening's agenda must be allowed the ability to do so. Our board policy, our local policy, and our board operating procedures states currently that those wishing to address the board during a regular meeting on the same item, that we would take the first 5 people who sign up on that particular issue or item. If that is one that is on the board agenda for that evening, we cannot limit that to 5 or 10 or 100. We would have to let everybody in the community who wants to speak on that agenda item speak. So what we have proposed adding to that agenda, instead of just saying no more than 5 people may speak about the same position on a subject, to start that sentence off, for non-agenda items, no more than 5 persons may speak about the same position on a subject. And then the first 5 persons who submit a note card will be recognized to speak. Again, we can have that be a part of non-agenda items that we traditionally hold at the first part of the meeting. Okay. Another change in the law was that all of the people wishing to address the board on an agenda item must be heard before the agenda item is considered, and that only makes sense, and that has been something that we have done traditionally. We have traditionally had non-agenda item comment at a special portion of the meeting at the very beginning. And then whenever we have an item related to an agenda, someone wishing to address related to an agenda item, we would do that at the time of the agenda when the board is considering that. So we are proposing no changes on that. One of the things that is a part of House Bill 2840 is that boards can no longer put any restrictions on the type of speech that is, or put any limits on criticism made by any members of the public. So what we have said in the past that the board will not allow derogatory comments, and we changed this into that the board would ask those addressing the board to refrain from derogatory comments. And so that would be the one change that we would propose there. So those are the 1, 2, 3 proposed changes to get more in line with House Bill 2040. If you flip over to page 8, this would change slightly the remarks that the president would read before public comments. And the public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person, adding in the sentence that says those needing an interpreter may have up to 6 minutes. And at the end, the last sentence would be the board asks that those addressing the board refrain from derogatory comments. So we'd love to have any discussion that you would want to have on this. I would caution the board that we may change this further and slightly on wording as we get more information from the Texas Association of School Boards for Update 114 when we consider some of these local policies later on in the fall semester. But want to make sure we're legal by September 1st. So I'd love to answer any questions you may have or hear any comments that you have regarding this.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Do you need action now, or?
We would love action now.
I move that we approve these changes to the board policy.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we are adjourned.